Thank you for joining us as we get into the news review. We have quite a stack of papers here, practically all of the major ones. We'll be dissecting them to let you know what exactly is happening in Ghana and beyond. Shortly, we'll be joined by Suleiman Abrahima, Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa. But how about we start with some sports? I don't know what your thoughts are, but let me know. What do you think the scoreline is going to be today as our Black Stars lock horns with the South Koreans? They play very fast football, and at least we can benefit from the fact that in that first encounter in the other match there, it ended in a stalemate. So we have it all to work for today, having lost painfully to Portugal. And interestingly, I don't know whether you've seen the articles, but a former English referee, a former player, and then a former referee as well, both saying, look, that was not a penalty. And in the least, the referee, the American referee, should have gone to VAR. Well, it's passed, it's gone. And maybe as the GFA has pushed for some action to be taken on the said referee, Ismail, maybe we can get better moving forward. Maybe there'll be a little more caution and fairness because, look, while some African countries got some very good results, Morocco, for example, yesterday downed Belgium, the second place team, by 2-0. That was fantastic. Senegal also breezed past Qatar by 3-1. But there is that tendency to cheat or feel cheated at the world stage. And it's something that I think African football federations ought to look at to ensure parity, because our numbers are already very small. We only have 5 representatives this year. But what do you think the scoreline will be today? Ghana, South Korea. You can share with us via WhatsApp, via Facebook, I beg your pardon, with the hashtag #AMShow. I'd love to know what you think how you think we're going to fare. But let's get into the papers now as we await Suleiman Abrahima to join us. Jospong partners Thai companies for rice production. And that story is on page 16. There's also Ghana wins appeal in Norway case. And if you remember that case about consulate there, it's quite a situation. But we've won that case. I'll bring you some scope to that story. Amate Otoado vowed to stop Korea as Black Stars play today. We can only wish them the very best. We're with them fully, physically, spiritually. We're praying for them. But we also know that on the pitch, it's not talk. It is the walk. And we pray that our boys are able to walk the talk later today. There's also gold for oil. Mining firms directed to sell 20% for petroleum. And that story as well featuring in the Daily Graphic newspaper. Let's get into some of them, and on the back page later do some sports. So gold for oil, that's the major one. From January next year, the government will exchange gold produced locally for a portion of the petroleum needs of the country. Now, the Gold for Oil program will enable the country to use part of the gold produced locally to purchase oil as part of measures the government is putting in place to secure regular and affordable petroleum products for the Ghanaian market. The move is expected to stabilize and help reduce the prices of petroleum products at the pump. The Minister of Lands and Natural Resources, Samuel Abu-Jinapor, who disclosed this to the Daily Graphic in Accra yesterday, said the measure would also help ease the pressure on the local currency, the Ghana cedi, with the possibility of strengthening it. In order to obtain the needed gold to support the program, the economic management team of the government had agreed with the Bank of Ghana to purchase in Ghana cedis at least 20% of all gold produced in the country before the rest was exported, Mr. Jinapor explained. Now, the minister said the purchase of the 20% minimum amount of gold would be part of the Bank of Ghana's domestic gold purchase program, which started at the beginning of this year. Now, to secure adequate quantities of gold to implement the program, Mr. Jinapor directed the Minerals Commission and the Precious Minerals Marketing Company to ensure that large and small-scale mining companies sold the required minimum amount to the government in Ghana cedis. And so that is the situation there. This is basically to stem the tide of pressure on the Ghana cedi and stabilize and reduce ex-pump prices of petroleum products. The question on my mind, though, has to do with gold itself and gold prices, which also fluctuate. Yes, the fluctuations may not be as volatile as we see it sometimes with our Ghana cedi. But what happens to the volatility of gold prices in that exchange? And of course, if the price of petroleum products go up, it would also mean, from my lay understanding, that if the price of gold is stable and the price of oil is rising, at some point you would need more gold to get the same amount of oil. So what are the pros and cons, the positives and negatives of this enterprise? I'm sure those who are delving into this matter, the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources and others, are taking stock of some of those. It's a matter that when we're joined by Suleiman Abrahima, I will run by him. But let's go to page 16 before we come back and do some international stories and then sports. So, Jospong Group of companies has entered into a partnership with major rice industry players in Thailand to develop an integrated rice farming project. The Thai companies will provide technical and equipment support for the entire rice value chain in the country, with the aim of producing rice for the local and export market. The first batch of the technical team is expected to arrive in Ghana in December. Of course, this is relevant, this is important at a time like this, because we know just how much the millions and tens of millions that we export when it comes to rice into our country. So any such moves would be welcome. I would also be looking at sustainability and the measures to be put in place, because we're looking at public-private partnerships. How can this be fed into by government? How can it be fed into by the private sector to ensure that we can stave ourselves of that penchant for importing rice and do better in terms of producing it locally and cutting down the prices? Just over the weekend, I was interacting with some people over the prices of rice, and trust me, it is scary. Though I know I think rice and oil, it has gone down by just a bit. But the prices are very high on the back of the exchange rate. And obviously, anything to curb that situation would be a step in the right direction. There's also Ghana wins appeal in Norway case, and the Oslo Court of Appeal has, in a unanimous decision, dismissed an appeal filed by Youngsbro AS, the sellers of a property identified by Ghana for use as a chancery building in Oslo, Norway. The court considered the appeal by Youngsbro against the judgment of the Oslo District, that is the High Court, in December 2021 as unmeritorious, and consequently dismissed it, awarding damages and procedural costs in favor of Ghana. So that's one albatross we've been able to get from around our necks, and we can move on with other matters pertinent to our national life. Let's take a quick look at some international stories and do sports and wrap it with the Daily Graphic. Teodoro Obiang wins 6th term in Equatorial Guinea. And this man, I'm sorry to say, is a reflection of everything we do not need in Africa. Why do I say that? Let me just give you some details, because I know, for example, that he's been in power for 4 decades and he's just won another term. The authorities in Equatorial Guinea announced on Saturday the re-election of Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo for a 6th term. The 80-year-old has been in power since 1979. 1979. In fact, to be honest, I wasn't born when he started ruling. Announcing the results, the head of the Electoral Commission said Obiang had won with 94.9% of the votes. And another thing, his party always wins with over 90%, guaranteed over 90% in a sham of an election. And I'm saying this not attacking another, African country. It's just about systems and this country and the resources they are sitting on. Anyway, the results of the general election solemnly proclaim His Excellency Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, for a term of 7 years, said the head of the Electoral Commission, Faustino Ndong Esono Eyang. Obiang had the backing of a coalition of 15 parties, including his own party, the Democratic Party of Equatorial Guinea. The percentages won by the opposition candidates were not announced, but trust me, like I've been saying, these figures and what emanates from some of these countries leaves a lot of us scratching our heads and wondering. I also go back to what Mo Ibrahim British Sudanese businessman, once said about African leaders at a forum. He asked, you keep voting these people into power who are that old, 70, 80, 60 something, 90. I remember that leader from North Africa who, he was in a wheelchair bound. I've forgotten whether it was Algeria or Tunisia. You know, all of these leaders, I'm not being ageist, but we need the young blood, the youthful energies of the youth. They are boisterous. They can do this, but the opportunities. And like I was saying, Mo Ibrahim was asking, we vote all these old leaders into power. Some of them, I'm sorry to say, like museum pieces, into power. And where will they take us? To the grave? They are not my words. They are Mo Ibrahim's words. I'm not being ageist, I repeat. But the point is, we need a lot of youth. After all, the future belongs to the young people today. Well, that is the situation in Equatorial Guinea, and for me, it is a crying shame, a real crying shame. But Blé Good returns to Côte d'Ivoire after 11 years in exile, and former youth minister Charles Blé Good, who was acquitted of crimes at the International Criminal Court, returned home last Saturday to the Ivory Coast after more than a decade in exile. He arrived in Abidjan on a commercial flight around 1 p.m. and made no comment at the airport, which was heavily guarded by police. This reminds me of the Laurent Gbagbo situation, himself acquitted by the same court and later, yes, was able to return. In fact, there has been some closeness with current President Alassane Ouattara in the Ivory Coast. I think it bodes for well, it bodes for good, but whether they can sustain it. The Ivory Coast making great strides economically and others, and we can only wish them the best. Suleimana, thank you so much for joining us. I have already taken that gold for oil story where mining firms have been directed to sell 20% to government for use for the gold for oil program. I've looked at that. I've also looked in the Daily Graphic at Ghana winning its appeal case in Norway. It has to do with the Oslo, Ghana consulate situation there. I'm sure you remember that story. And finally, I was just, going through the fact that Teodoro Obiang in Equatorial Guinea has won a 6th term. He's already been in power for over 40 years. What's your quick reflection on these stories, very quickly?
Well, I think on the Gold for Oil program, we are at a point where the government would have to take very urgent steps to ensure that we continue to have oil supply, because conversations with experts in the industry points to a very, very bleak future if certain quick steps are not taken. And I'm sure that is why the government is implementing this policy. I'm just hoping that it will be a policy that will go down with the firms in that sector, because it's also important to ensure that we do not jeopardize our investment climate, even as we are trying to overcome these turbulent winds within the economy. For me, the question that I keep asking is, why would it take this particular situation for the government of the day to begin to implement certain measures that ought to be implemented by virtue of the country being a third world country or the country being a developing country? If you look at the measures that the government has put in place in terms of, no V8, no V6, and so on and so forth, why would it have taken where we are now for the government to implement a policy like that in order to cut costs? So, well, maybe those are the lessons that we have to learn. But like I said, I just hope that the industry players would play ball on these policies, because sometimes it's one thing enforcing the law and another thing getting the other party to comply. So I just hope that it goes well. Teodoro Obiang, 6th term. The last time I was reading, I was told, or what I found was that he even won the election by some 99 point something percent.
So it's 94+%. In fact, he has always won elections by over 90%. The minimum, it would be in the 90% range.
Yeah, and that certainly would tell you the kind of democracy they are practicing. I think it's just elections to validate something, and not a credible election that ought to be experienced in a democratic environment. As I keep saying, whilst these things are happening, the AU looks on. until maybe one day things go bad, and then they begin to impose their sanctions and deploy troops and all of that. I hope that the AU, its protocols on democracy, elections, good governance, and all of that will begin to be enforced, so that we don't continue to have these kinds of things happening. If it's Africa that must be democratic, we must ensure that countries are being democratic rather than these kinds of charades that pretend to be democrats.
Okie doke, let's get into some other stories very quickly. On the back page, and let me just do this because I requested that some of you share your thoughts about what the scoreline would be for the Black Stars later today. So Theo Walker-Smith has joined the live feed and he says, Ghana 2, South Korea 0. And this one's from Ahmed Abdulrahman Ladan, says Ghana 3, South Korea 1. So for both of you, a difference of 2 goals. That reflects the story on the back page of the Daily Graphic. Amati Otoado vow to stop South Korea. Picture there Son Heung-min of South Korea and Tottenham, and Daniel Amati of Ghana, and I believe Leicester City. Both of them pictured there. What is your prediction, Suleimana, for today's match? We lost by a goal's difference, a dubious goal, penalty, I should say, that was awarded Portugal. But what are you expecting today?
Well, I should say that I really did not have that much confidence in the team, except that out of patriotism, I hoped that they could do well. But I was seriously impressed with the performance against Portugal. If you had asked me at that time and I wanted to be candid, I would say, look, they would just load us in that game. But really, when we opened up in the second game, it was second half. It was quite clear that we could just play them on equal basis, and we could stand the same chances in terms of winning. And so going into this game and with that reinvigorated, expectations that I have, I can only say that we should win, and we must win, and I'm sure that we will win. In terms of a scoreline, it's a difficult one to predict. I just know and believe that we're gonna win to keep our chances alive.
We can only wish the Black Stars the very best. They are our team, and their success is our success. The Ghanaian Times newspaper now. There's Gold for Oil program from January 1st. The story is here as well. Veep launches $450 million multi-country credit facility to address socio-economic challenges in northern Ghana. And there's Oslo chance rebuilding case. Norway dismisses appeal against Ghana. Stories we've already seen. So let me just do the one on page 15. Let me just get that story on page 15. Well, before that, on page 13, government urged to set up children's fund for adult life support. And one of the stories we took today, for example, the low investment in kindergarten and lower level education at that level. But on page 15, Veep launches $450 million multi-country credit facility to address socio-economic challenges in northern Ghana. And the Vice President has expressed the hope that the rollout of the Gulf of Guinea Northern Region's Social Cohesion Project, that is the SOCO project, will address key socio-economic hurdles facing people in the northern part of Ghana. He said it was an undeniable fact that many parts of the north had, over the years, been hit by acute economic challenges. And the rollout of the project was a timely intervention because it had the potential to correct some of the key emergent and recurring challenges in the northern part of the country. The launch of the project here in Bolgatanga was preceded by a regional sensitization exercise by the Ministry of Local Government. Now, I've heard talk about the $150 million and the collaboration, Ghana, Togo, and I believe the Ivory Coast, among others. What do you make of it? Is this what is going to help stem the tide of the terrorist threat to our land, especially as there is a monetary aspect to it, like we heard from National Security Minister Khan Dapa recently? What's your take?
Well, it's a positive development, but it's difficult to conclude that this would be the answer to the threats that we face from the terrorist groups and the insurgent activities in the Sahel region. we are beginning to see a spillover of refugees into many parts of the Upper East region. I don't think that, yes, money is a necessary condition, but certainly not a sufficient condition to deal with the problem. We need to effectively sensitize our people. We need to beef up security over there. We need to engage multilaterally and, as a group. I am not too comfortable with the approach of ECOWAS towards this. It appears that every country for themselves and, God for us all. I think we've gotten to a point where we need to see a strong multinational approach towards combating the menace that we face, because it started with Mali, now it's in Burkina. Niger is caught up in the middle there. We've seen an attack before in Cote d'Ivoire. We've seen multiple attacks in Togo. So we certainly are under a very, very serious threat. The money is important, but I think what is needed is beyond money. And we don't want to wait till there's a strike before we start to panic and react desperately and all of that. So yes,
right.
It's a great intervention, but we need more to be done.
All right, but this is an interesting story. I think I should get into it. On the back page, on the back of the football that we're playing today, Fianu urges stars to take own referee to South Korea game. Now, the chairman of the Ghana League Clubs Association, that is GALCA, Mr. Kujo Fianu, has called on the Black Stars to carry their own referee into today's World Cup Group H game against South Korea. But what does he mean? Ghana will face the Koreans to a potentially blistering afternoon of football but at the Education City Stadium, hoping to pinch victory to put them back into contention. The referee in the game, he's quoted as saying, against Portugal, Ismail El-Fath, was clearly against us, and I agree with him. He took a bad penalty with Cristiano Ronaldo, converted to put his side in the lead. This should serve as a wake-up call for the team. The players must know from now onwards that they have no referee on their side. And just as the legendary Azuma Nelson would do in the boxing ring, they should also carry their own official into the game. Basically meaning that do what must be done so that cheating won't be able to affect you in any way. Your thoughts? Quick one.
Well, I certainly agree with him. I was also very, very disappointed with some of the decisions of the referee in our game against Portugal. And so, there are people who are of the view that an African team hasn't gotten to, even the semifinals, not to talk about the finals before, sometimes because of these bias against African teams. And so to have the psyche that, look, I'm going into this game, I'm not going to depend on any favorable decisions of the referee in order to win, but I'm just going to do what it takes. Of course, that doesn't mean that you don't go by the rules. Yes, I'll go by the rules, but I'm just going to make sure that I am winning, and a referee cannot deny me of the win, whether they are biased or favorable towards me. With that kind of mindset, if you go in and you have a referee who is just going by the rules and fair to all or to both teams, fine. If you have a referee that is having some mindset that, look, if I get a chance, I will favor the South Koreans, and you don't provide that opportunity, suddenly you stay on top of your game. And so going into the match with that kind of mindset is certainly what we need.
All right. Let's get into Republic Press. I'll not read any story from here because most of them are self-explanatory and we've discussed them. But Gender Ministry champions 20-year imprisonment for gender-based violence. That's something I'd love you to react to. Let's collaborate to end Apenkwa road crashes. That's according to the Accra mayor. And, that situation keeps taking lives, precious lives. Africa needs new strategic framework for industrialization. That's according to Alan Tremating. But some people in recent times have questioned his own situation when it comes to industrialization in the country, aka 1D1F, among others. Then NDC MPs lament government job freeze. Now, we do know that in the civil service from next year, January, there will be a freeze on employment. and that has been taken up. And finally, I'm not anti-Mahama, Ofosu Ampofu says so. So what do you think about the call by the Gender Ministry? 20-year imprisonment for gender-based violence. There's also the road crashes in Apenkwa. The Accra mayor is calling for collaboration to end it, and Alan Chemating calling for a new strategic framework for industrialization. Has he himself done enough? You could also talk about the NDC's lamentations. Quick reactions?
Well, gender-based violence, a very, very important matter affecting many people in our society. The gender minister comes from the Northeast region, and let me say the Northern region for that matter. A lot of the things that happen in that part of the country, are serious violations, but sometimes considered, culturally appropriate, culturally not considered abusive, and all of that. I still believe that a lot of education sensitization has to be done, particularly for our men, and also especially for societies that have cultures that tolerate abuses, particularly against women. It's a very, very serious phenomenon. I don't think that the solution to it is simply to say more years in prison for offenders. I don't think people commit it because the current legal regime imposes a mild sanction against people found culpable to have indulged in gender-based violence. I think people do it because they feel, well, it is something that is culturally accepted. Why? If I have my wife and I beat my wife, that's my wife. Why would anybody care? And so on. So education for me is critical. And of course, letting the law work is important. People who are involved in gender-based violence advocacy will tell you. Sometimes you want to engage, and the victim's family now comes pleading, no, we don't want this matter to go to court. No, let's settle it at home. And those are the kinds of things that really do not help. 1D1F, a terrible failure. I don't know whether we can blame Alan Chemating. I'm not too sure about that, because the president sets up an architecture that makes the 1D1F whole exercise coordinated from a supposed ministry for business, a ministry for special initiatives, and a ministry of business was created, and all of that. People say, look, Alan was basically set up to fail, because the president, there's a ministry for trade and industry, and then the president sets up other subsidiary ministries and then parcels out everything that the Ministry of Trade is supposed to do to those ministries. So clearly, for me, Alan was set up to fail. For whatever reasons, I don't know. So I honestly don't think that we can blame Alan Chemating if the 1D1F thing has proven to be a failure.
Right.
NDC, whether pro-Mahama or anti-Mahama, well, that's something for them.
I know. Let's get into some other stories quickly. So, and I'll just take a few headlines from some of the papers to wrap the conversation in about a minute. There is, so the same story about the oil purchases, then the launch of that project for 6 regions, and the Norway court issue as well in the Daily Guide newspaper. But it also talks about stealing the show in Qatar, that is Ghana, and it has to do with the decorative designs and the dressing of our fans there. The final newspaper, job creation, 500 prisons office assistants begin training. Then there's also 2023 budget. You start to drive job creation. Let me just pick your, okay, so let me hold on before I pick your thoughts. The Jospong issue is here as well in the Ghanaian Publisher newspaper. There's also 10 billion Ghana cedi You Start leads job creation. And finally, the new crusading guide. Norway court dismisses appeal. Government to pump 10 billion Ghana cedis into You Start. Basically a regurgitation of the same stories. How do you react to the 2023 budget briefly, and the fact that the majority leader says this is going to better the social capital of our country, while the minority says with e-levy, VAT, and the situation, and all we know about the bonds and all of that is only going to exacerbate the plight of the Ghanaian? Quick reactions to that, and it's a wrap.
Well, the 2023 budget certainly is not a positive news for our country. There's only perhaps one thing that for me is positive, and that is the fact that having driven us into a ditch, the same government now realizes that they need to do things that are reasonable, including the measures that have been taken to cut back on the tax for appointees, free fuel, free this, free that. Now, having gotten us into that deep pit, they are promising that, no VA, on intercity or within intracity, no V6, cut back on this allowance, cut back on that allowance. So maybe that's the only thing that I see as reflecting a lesson that has been learned by the government. All other things in the budget, I think, points to a really excruciating time ahead of us.
Right.
Now, they keep talking about job creation. The same budget that talks about no employment free within the public civil sector. And we are in a country where a lot of people look up to the public and civil service to gain employment.
Right.
And then they are talking about USTAR. They talked about e-levy being whatever to get us the money to do that. E-levy has been a failure and was bound to fail. We pointed to examples elsewhere where similar things have failed. They still insist it will work. Now they've reduced it. It happened in other countries the same way. In Uganda, a certain percentage was pegged. It didn't work. They reduced it. It didn't work. Eventually, they had to scrap it. Government will come to the point where it will scrap the e-levy, certainly. And I don't know why they keep promising and why they think that people will still believe them.
Right.
For all the fantastic promises they made to get the votes of Ghanaians in 2007, 2016,
Right.
and the monumental failure so far, I don't know why they still think that people will believe them when they make these fanciful promises.
Well, interesting, your take there, but we're grateful as always, Suleimana, that you've joined us for this conversation, and we wish you the very best of the day. Let me just wrap with some of my thoughts with the Daily Dispatch newspaper. Kwesi Botwe, from my lecturer to a senior brother for over 42 years. That's according to Ben Efson. There's also Baumia launches Amabuzia's book, The Bittersweet Pill of Politics, and withdrawal from West Wuogon by-elections was to save lives, NDC's Ofosu Ampofo says so. Let me congratulate Elegant Homes, one of those stalwarts for us when it comes to our Habitat Fair. In that recently organized Ghana Property Awards, they were judged Best Residential Developer, Middle Income Luxurious category in 2022. That is Elegant Homes. Congratulations to Dorothy Efuakwashi and her team. But right before we get into sports, water is life, right? It regulates your body temperature, keeps you alive and kicking. Awake is premium purified water treated through a strict purification process to ensure that every bottle on the market refreshes you better. We have the perfect sizes for all occasions, 330 and 500 ml bottles to fit your pockets and bags, 750 ml for the heavy drinkers, 1.5 liters for those who always want more, like me. Now, we've introduced our special 19-liter jars for offices and homes. Now you just need to stay awake with Awake Purified Drinking Water wherever you go. So come on, grab a bottle of Awake Water and get quality hydration. Awake Purified Drinking Water, one for life. Remember, for every bottle you purchase, an amount is donated to the National Cardiothoracic Center. It's produced by Casapreco. For bulk purchases, just call 0262 351 251. This advert is FDA approved. On that note, Ghana 4, let's settle for sports. Today, our Black Stars are going to do the do. They're going to win for us. Say Black Stars, go Ghana. Sports up next.